Nintendo Switch, combining home console and portable handheld into one device. It opened a whole new category of gaming devices and ushered in a brand new era of handheld gaming. Since its launch in 2017, the console has seen its fair share of praises and criticisms. With Nintendo announcing an announcement of their next console, its chapter in video game history is nearing its end. As exciting as its life was, the events that occurred before its introduction is equally fascinating, as an unlikely company plays a key role in shaping the console we have today. To tell the story of Nintendo Switch, we need to go back in time, to 2007. The story starts with an announcement of a device that has changed mankind forever: iPhone. If you're too young to know what it was like before smartphones took over everything, imagine each category of apps requiring a separate devices or tools. That's how it was back then. We still have digital cameras and others in the market today, but they aren't as prevalent or mainstream as devices like flip video cameras and iPods were. They simply aren't a necessity anymore. An innocent idea of a miniature computer in the palm of your hand began to cannibalize everything, even Apple's own products. Apple was unstoppable until Android happened. Offering a similar level of sophisticated smart OS as iOS to other companies, Apple no longer had the software advantage. Something more radical needed to happen to differentiate iPhones from the rest. With iPhone 4, Apple introduced the A4 chip, Apple's own designed chip. This humble single-core chip was a starting point for a smartphone spec war. The performance of phones before smartphones wasn't a priority as long as it worked. Some of you may not know what phone gaming was like back then. You may associate phone games with Snake Game, Tetris, and some odd puzzle games here and there, but it was more robust than you may give credit for. If you search old mobile Java games, you can find some amazing titles from the past that are still worth a play. But the methods of obtaining these titles weren't as polished or accessible as they are today. If you have experienced mobile gaming before smartphones, leave a comment down below about your own experience. Phones simply had to be good enough to make phone calls. There was no demand to make phones more powerful. Even the operating system typically ran at choppy frame rates. Smartphones changed it all. Running an advanced operating system began to require more horsepower. New features were locked behind newer phones as older phones weren't powerful or efficient enough to handle. Of course, this was likely a marketing talk to sell new phones, but it does hold water considering the generational improvements of mobile chips were staggering. Just look at Apple's own chips. The year-over-year improvements in the early days are quite astonishing. This meant more games of different varieties could run on a device you carry with you wherever you go. This was a game changer, with even Apple, who's never given attention to gaming, announcing iPod Touch as the best-selling video game device.
iPod Touch outsells Nintendo and Sony portable game players combined.
Mobile games were still limited by touch control and consumers' unwillingness to spend money for a game unless it was microtransaction. Mobile games didn't take over traditional games, but rather coexist alongside it, as it became something completely different. But the hardware was showing potential for anyone who wished to utilize it. One of the first companies to do so was Nvidia. Nvidia Tegra chips had a reputation of being a powerful chip with a flaw. Apps were designed with Snapdragon chips in mind, resulting in Tegra chips causing error or not running properly. But the reputation they had from the PC GPU space and the horsepower of Tegra was enough for it to be used by select major players in the market. Zune HD, Microsoft's iPod Touch competitor, released in 2009, used the first Tegra chip, Tegra APX 2600. Nexus 7, launched in 2012, used a Tegra 3 chip. Being a reference device from Google at a killer price, it is one of the most iconic Android tablets. I was lucky enough to own it and the sequel. It still suffered from app compatibility, but due to its popularity, many compatibility issues were resolved after launch. Nvidia never announced how many units each chips have sold, But considering the sales and the reputation of each devices, Nexus 7 put Tegra chips on the map for many consumers. But it's still just a tablet. It hasn't showcased the potential of Tegra chips. Rather than waiting for another company, Nvidia stepped in and started to develop their own product that captured the potential of Tegra chips.
I'd like to introduce you to Project Thor. Project Shield.
Nvidia Shield, released in 2013, utilizes the Tegra 4 chip in a fascinating handheld design. It's essentially a controller with a screen attached, a powerful Android device that includes beefy battery and a fan to keep the unit cool and running for hours. This project coincides with an attempt to diversify the gaming hardware space. Emerging ideas of the time like the Steam Machine, a Linux-based gaming PC in the form of a console, an Android gaming device that started with a little device called Ouya, a notorious Android gaming console that failed miserably due to various reasons. The one difference Nvidia had over other devices were the experience the company had with PC gaming and the understanding they had of the Android space. This device allowed Nvidia graphics card users to seamlessly stream their gaming PC to their handhelds and even a cloud service as well. This is nothing special by today's standard, but it was incredible how polished it was. It also had full access to Google services like the Play Store, letting users download and access millions of already established games on the marketplace. If it didn't support controllers, the device had button mapping software built in. And if that isn't your cup of coffee, its touchscreen allowed you to interact with the software just like a phone or tablet. But due to the pricing, the limitation Nvidia has placed on PC streaming feature, and the fact that it was an Android device meant that it didn't sell well. Comparing it to popular Android tablets from the era, it's a tough sell. However, that did not stop Nvidia from going forward with a sequel and an initiative that would change people's perspective of the device. Shortly after the launch of Shield, Nvidia announced another device that utilized the Tegra 4 chip called Nvidia Tegra Note 7. Manufactured by numerous companies, it was targeted to compete with the second generation Nexus 7, which ditched the Tegra chip and went with a Snapdragon S4 Pro chip. But since Nexus devices were sold at a loss which could then be recouped with software sales, Nvidia couldn't, which meant it had worse spec and build quality. But this mediocre device became a foundation.
Today I'm really excited to introduce the next products in the Shield family, Shield Tablet and Shield Wireless Controller.
Perhaps Nvidia thought selling a gaming device was tougher than selling a regular smart device that just happened to be excellent in gaming. This shift in strategy resulted in variety, starting with Nvidia Shield Tablet, with the former device renamed as Shield Portable, and this device later renamed as Shield Tablet K1. Utilizing the Tegra K1 chip, Shield Tablet was a solid Android tablet with good spec and fair pricing. It managed to achieve this by separating the gaming side of the device. The device doesn't come with a controller or a stand. They were sold separately. This meant that if you weren't looking for a proper gaming device and wanted a regular tablet for regular usage and light Android gaming, the Shield Tablet was a solid choice. For gamers, if they wanted all the accessories, the price jumped beyond the reasonable amount, but since it's just a tablet, any compatible third-party controllers and accessories could be used instead. But it's still an Android device. Even if the chip inside is beefier than the competitors, it doesn't change the fact that it is limited by the lowest common denominator, as all apps and games need to be compatible with most devices to make money. Like all gaming devices, in order to be successful, it needs killer software. Prior to the launch of Shield Tablet, Nvidia surprised everyone by announcing that Portal and Half-Life 2 were coming to Shield devices. They are older titles priced at $10 that could only run on Shield devices. Some were disappointed by the announcement, while others were excited by the potential of what's to come as these ports were done by Nvidia Lightspeed Studio, not Valve, the original developer. This meant that potentially any PC games could be ported by Nvidia as long as the owners of the game allowed it. Come 2015, SHIELD would change once again.
Today, we are entering and introducing NVIDIA's first living room entertainment device, the NVIDIA Shield.
NVIDIA Shield, later renamed to Shield TV, is the final form of the Shield lineup. It did later receive an update in the form of a tube, but the fundamental form factor hasn't changed since this product. Shield is now an Android set-top box that plugs to your TV. It used to be bundled with a controller, but it was removed in favor of a remote controller. Shield TV is a solid set-top box. It can handle any video you throw at and output at 4K resolution. It has built-in AI upscaling feature for videos and can be used as a media server by running Plex server. But let's focus on the gaming side. The new Tegra X1 chip allowed even more titles to be ported to the Shield. Notable titles include Crysis 3, a game from 2013 ported to a mobile chip just 2 years after its launch on PC and consoles, Metal Gear Solid HD Collection, Doom 3, Resident Evil 5, Tomb Raider Reboot from 2013, Borderlands 2, Borderlands the pre-sequel, and more. And yes, it's the same chip that's in the Switch. But despite all these efforts, Shield lineup as gaming devices have failed. The product still lives as it's a solid Android TV device, but with couple titles delisted from the store and Nvidia stopping its efforts to porting, there's no point buying a Shield for gaming, as if you want to stream games from PC or cloud or want to play Android titles, there are cheaper alternatives that offer similar experiences. Ironically, these failed attempts have created the juggernaut we know as Nintendo Switch. If you haven't noticed it yet, think of what the Shield devices are. Devices with mobile chips that can be a portable handheld, a tablet, and a TV box. That's Nintendo Switch. Remember the Nexus 7 I mentioned in the beginning? The Nexus lineup was a series of reference devices Google designed alongside different manufacturers to showcase what Android devices should be like. It was the baseline in which all manufacturers could adhere to. Although I don't believe the Shield lineup was Nvidia's attempt to create reference devices, their shifting strategy to sell more units resulted in variety. It may have been a destiny, or a crazy coincidence, but this was what Nintendo needed. There was a growing concern that handheld gaming was gonna fade away due to the rise of smartphones. In the home console space, Nintendo launched the Wii U in 2012. There were 3 problems with this console. First, the marketing was terrible, as it wasn't clear what a Wii U was. The name made it sound like an accessory like Wii Fit, Wii Balance Board, Wii Remote, and so on. The first impression wasn't good either. What do you think was the first Wii U game Nintendo showed in their trailer? It was the new Super Mario Bros. Game for Wii U. A game that looks nearly identical to the Wii version. To make the matter worse, the trailer video was in 720p, so the resolution upgrade the Wii U version received was hard to tell. Second, the raw power of Wii U was abysmal. The console belongs to the same generation as PS4 and Xbox One, but its performance was on par with Xbox 360, a previous generation console. In the early days of the console, third-party developers ported their Xbox 360 titles to the Wii U, but it soon died down, leaving just Nintendo publishing games for the console, which there weren't that many of. Third, the gimmick wasn't fully realized. The gamepad is a novel idea, but it shouldn't have been the core feature of the console. The additional controls and features allowed by a touchscreen is an interesting idea, but having to constantly look down on the big bulky controller isn't ideal. I get that they wanted to bring the DS experience to the living room, but if the gamepad was an accessory instead of a key feature, it may have done better. Life is kinda funny sometimes, as the failure of Wii U directly attributed to the success of 3DS. It launched in 2011, and due to lower than expected sales number, Nintendo reduced the price after a couple months. 3DS has sold quite well, with 75 million units sold, when its competitor, PS Vita, only managed to sell between 10 to 15 million units. What was the difference between these two devices? It was the games. With the failure of Wii U, Nintendo's focus was directly on 3DS and brought hundreds of quality titles to the system. They still made Wii U games, but many of them were also brought to the 3DS, as that's where the money was. Sony, on the other hand, had very successful home consoles. It's still unclear why Sony suddenly stopped supporting Vita. Perhaps Sony saw the poor sales of Vita, the dominance PS4 had in the console war, and the gloomy future of handheld consoles, and decided to call it quits. Even though two companies both had failures in their consoles, Sony was in a better position than Nintendo, as home console is where the money's at, with games having higher price tags and the future of handheld space being uncertain. Whatever the next console Nintendo would release, everyone instinctively knew it would be their last chance. Nintendo could not risk another failure. Lucky for Nintendo, they already had a way out. With Sony exiting the handheld console space, Nintendo was the only player in the market. Even if the market for handhelds were shrinking, it's all fine when they have the complete monopoly on handheld consoles. To keep the business afloat, all they had to do was release another handheld console. But what if they combined the best of both worlds? Wii U was Nintendo's attempt to bring the DS experience to the living room. So what if instead of bringing the handheld experience to the living room, they bring the actual handheld to the living room? Nintendo Switch is an evolution of Nintendo's previous attempts. It's a refined Wii U. Instead of having a bulky gamepad, the gamepad itself is a console. Instead of remotely streaming games from the console to the gamepad itself runs the game so you can take it wherever you go. And would you look at that, there are already products that have tested these ideas. This is where the water becomes a bit murky, as we do not know the full details of the development process of the Switch. We do not know when the development for Switch has started or when the idea of hybrid came to be. But looking at the history of technology and gaming and the information available to us, it wouldn't be a stretch to say that Shield has influenced the Switch. If Shield gave birth to Switch, we could also say the reverse is true, that the birth of Switch killed Shield. Nvidia and Nintendo had a very unique partnership. Nintendo was essentially asking Nvidia if they could destroy the Shield lineup in exchange for selling more chips. And since the Shield lineup never did well to begin with, they went with Nintendo and struck a one-of-a-kind deal. Nvidia cancelled a spec refresh for Shield tablet, as it would be too similar to the Switch. Nintendo allowed Nvidia to port Nintendo Wii titles to the Shield exclusively in the Chinese market. Now, it didn't sell well due to the high price of Shield and were subsequently delisted, but this was unheard of. Nintendo has never allowed another company to port their games to a non-Nintendo gaming hardware. Philips did make their own Mario and Zelda games in the 90s for the CDI console, but that was due to a failed deal between Nintendo and Philips, which resulted in Nintendo allowing Philips to use Nintendo's IP to create new games. But bringing existing titles created by Nintendo to a competing platform, this was the first. Some of you may not agree with me calling Shield a competitor to the Switch, but if you remove the stigma against smart TV boxes and look at how Nvidia was pushing the Shield, it was no different to an Xbox One. It's just that it wasn't a good competitor. This deal allowed Nvidia Lightspeed Studio to port New Super Mario Bros. Wii, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, Punch-Out for Wii, Super Mario Galaxy, and Donkey Kong Country Returns, with Mario Kart Wii being cancelled due to Chinese government not approving the release. These titles all ran at 1080p and were released before the Switch versions, with majority of titles not yet released or even announced for Switch at the time of writing. Nvidia has abandoned their efforts to compete in the mobile chip space after the Tegra X1. Their newer chips are made for cars that do not require a tight power efficiency compared to mobile. With rumors suggesting that Nvidia will provide chips for the next-gen Nintendo console, it'll be interesting to see what they'll bring to the table, as it'll be the first time Nvidia creates a chip dedicated for Nintendo console. Nvidia Shield, a product that came out to sell more Tegra chips. A chip that came out to compete in the mobile Android space. Android that came out to compete with iPhones. iPhone that came out to replace 3 devices: an iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator device. We have come a long way since 2007. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. That's it for now. Bye.